Everyone, and welcome back to Game of School. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Koh, and now that you have completed Game of School and you achieved the highest score possible, here's your special content. So I have prepared this lecture with you in mind and hoping that I could create something or offer you a lesson that would really help you no matter what you choose to do. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So, oh, and let me turn off my video so that you can focus, okay? So, Game of School, special content, okay? So this is a deep work study guide. So I'll explain what deep work is, okay? All right, so I'm your lecturer and your host, I guess, of Game of School, Dr. Jason Koh. I currently work at the University of Hong Kong, although I soon will be teaching at the Hong Kong Baptist University in the Academy of Film. Right now, I'm teaching on behalf of the Department of Comparative Literature, specifically the MA in Literary and Cultural Studies, the Gender Studies program, the American Studies program, and also I'm on the board of the Women's Studies Research Center. So check out these institutions, they're really great. Okay, now, the contents of today's lecture. So I'll be giving a short preface, then I'll introduce this idea of deep work. I'll give you the definitions and the thesis statement, and I'll be basically giving you a review of work, scholarship, you could say, or as an instruction manual from Deep Work by Cal Newport, and I'll get into that. So feel free to come back to this page and jump around at this table of contents. I think you'll need to watch this multiple times or go through the PowerPoint slides multiple times. Sometimes some parts might sink in, other parts might sink in later. So I recommend that you bookmark this and come back to it when you need it. Okay. All right, so the preface. This is my final lecture on behalf of HKU. So it was pretty difficult for me to think about what is it that I want to teach to all of my students. Now, my classes are quite interdisciplinary. So I'm teaching classes in very different fields. So I needed to think of what can I teach that will really help students, regardless of their background, their politics, and their career decisions. Now, obviously, I can only teach this in English, but other than that, I'm hoping that this will help you no matter what you choose to do. The idea is to help you thrive. Okay? This is based on this Greek concept of eudaimonia. I'm not sure, I don't speak Greek or ancient Greek. You can check out some philosophy podcasts if you're interested in finding out more about that. But this idea of thriving is different from happiness or success or perfection per se, which doesn't really exist, right? Instead, eudaimonia is an idea where you are thriving, okay? And it's like a contentment and a satisfaction, but it's also a health, a mental health, a physical health, and also a health within your community because you're part of it and you're thriving in it. You can think of thriving as something more like, a place or a way that plants are growing, they're thriving, okay? And that's what I want for you as my students or former students or whoever is watching this, okay? I hope that you thrive. And I was thinking about how is it that I can impart one final lecture that will help you thrive. So it couldn't be, some arcane literary theory or political theory. It couldn't be something about, new media. It had to, or, history of cinema. It needed to be something that you can use no matter what you choose to do, whether you decide to go to grad school or if you decide to, be a computer programmer, or if you want to be a content creator, or, as we'll talk about later, if you want to be a stone cutter, for example. Okay? All right, so I guess the first question we can start with then is, what is the secret to success, right? Many of you who are watching this lecture, you're already at a point where you're hoping to succeed in whatever it is that you do. And when I was many of yours age, like 20 years old, I was also at this point where I needed to make a sort of decision about where I want to go with my life and how serious do I want to be about what I'm doing. And I realized that a lot of times I'd gotten through life by kind of rushing through things or kind of like trying to find shortcuts to get through things. And I wasn't really happy with where I was going and how my life had turned out at that time. And I was reading a lot, and I just started doing my graduate school work. And I read a short story from Yu Hua. He's a Chinese contemporary novelist, but he also wrote a book of short stories that was translated by Andrew Jones, called The Past and the Punishments. And it's sort of a, I don't know if you want to call it satire, but it's, I don't know, it's very, very well written, and the translation is very good. So I think we need to give a lot of credit to Professor Jones. But there was one particular scene that I thought was quite interesting in one of the short stories, where there's an inn. And The Past and the Punishments is sort of a meta genre, meta narrative about the genre of wuxia, right? So like these kind of martial arts stories, or stories of the jianghu, right? The Chinese gangsters, you know, not gangsters in the present tense, but like the past tense, like bandits, or like, you know, warriors who would go around the countryside fighting, right? So imagine that there's this countryside inn, just like in a wuxia film, and there's these people drinking and carousing at an inn, and there's a person who walks up and says, "I'm selling secrets," right? "I'm selling secrets," and he has these set of scrolls, right? And he's like, "I have different scrolls for different things that will give you the secrets to things." And he has one scroll, right? And it says, "The secret to success," right? And so one of the patrons buys the scroll and opens the scroll, and it just says two things, just says two words: work hard. That's it, right? So the secret to success is to work hard. And when I read that, I thought that was quite profound, right? How like all of these secrets could be, you know, built into this one thing. It's no matter what you do, if you work hard, then that's how you will get there. Now, now that it's 10, 15, almost 20 years later, I want to update this. And hard work really did get me to where I am now, but I think that you need to know that hard work is not easy. Hard work requires a lot of trust in the process of work. So over time, I started thinking about a lot of kind of questions about how do I maintain this? You know, how do I keep working even when I lose hope? Okay. So one of the kind of really kind of inspirational quotes that I really like is by Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis was he was a journalist. He's a muckraking journalist. So he was the type who would write journalism that was very critical of policy and government, and he would investigate things. Similar to Aldous Huxley, you know, he would investigate different types of you know, factory conditions, and, you know, or food safety and this kind of thing. And he'd write these big kind of pieces that would criticize it to do kind of more work in the social justice sphere. And this was in the early 1900s. And this is what Jacob Riis said. He said, "When nothing seems to help, I go and look at a stonecutter hammering away at his rock, perhaps 100 times, without as much as a crack showing in it. Yet, at the 101st blow, it will split in two. And I know it was not that blow that did it, but all that had gone before." So you need to think about, like, when you're working, the moment that you actually achieve, where you actually break through your plateau, where you actually get the thing that you want, whether that's an A in Dr. Koh's class, or, you know, I don't know, something much more worthwhile, like, you know, your first job, or, I don't know, financial security or something like that. It's never going to be the last thing that you did that actually kind of makes it so that you achieve. It's everything that came before. So you have to know that the entire process is what leads to that outcome, not just that single moment right before the outcome. So what that means then is that if you are going to, you need to persist, right? And know that it's never going to be the next one or the next one. But at the same time, everything that you did before is what accumulates and creates that sort of, you know, blow that splits it in two. So with that in mind, then you need to think, well, you don't have to, right? You do what you want. But I've been trying to encourage you to embrace this growth mindset, to take things that are difficult and to kind of embrace the challenge, to take the challenge and say, yes, I'm going to grow from this, right? So a metaphor I like to use that I think many people are talking about right now, especially during this coronavirus crisis and the absurdity of it all, is the myth of Sisyphus, specifically as narrated and kind of interpreted by Albert Camus. And in the myth of Sisyphus, at least from Camus' interpretation, Sisyphus is this this Greek, I guess he's Greek, yeah, kind of character who was cursed by the gods to have to take a giant stone and roll it up a mountain. And every single time he would roll that rock up the mountain, it would roll back down. And then he would have to roll it back up again. And this was his life, right? He would have to roll it up, and then roll back down. Roll it up, and it would roll back down, okay? Now, how do you interpret this? How do you manage to understand this? And what Camus is saying is that this act of pushing your rock up the hill is very similar to the absurdity of life itself, right? You live, you die. You work, but what does it come to, right? There's no sense of like, you never reach that apex and you get to stay there. It always rolls back down, right? So how do you handle that absurdity? How do you handle that? And what Camus says is that in order to understand and embrace that, you need to embrace the absurdity of it. So you need to love your rock, okay? You need to love pushing that rock up the hill. So instead of saying, oh no, I need to push this rock up the hill again, instead it's, I get to push this rock up the hill. I love pushing this rock up the hill, okay? And this is a sort of trust that, you know, that this actual process itself of pushing the rock is what makes you happy, okay, is what you enjoy. So this also really helped me alleviate my anxiety, right? Because what that kind of taught me is, as long as I'm working hard, as long as then I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to fear. I don't have to feel anxious about what's happening, because this thing that I do is what gives me meaning in my life. Okay. So what Camus says is that when we think of Sisyphus, then we need to imagine Sisyphus happy. Okay. That is how we handle the absurdity of life. Now, I'm not saying that that's the only sort of way of handling or understanding you know, life's absurdities, if that is how you choose to view it. At the same time, I think it's one that's very, very conducive to the kind of work that's necessary to kind of achieve what it is that you want to achieve. It's to imagine that it's not so much the achievement that matters, but the process of going through the kind of steps and the journey to get to that achievement. That really is what makes you happy, okay? So focusing on that will alleviate anxiety. And I'll talk more about this, but anxiety is the #1 productivity killer, okay? So then if you trust in the process, then you will have persistence, okay? Then you will continue. Even though the rock falls, even though you fail, even though you don't achieve what it is that you want to do, you will try again and again. And another thing that the myth of Sisyphus, or this idea of, you know, the stone cracking in half only on the 101st blow, is an understanding of cycles. Is that it's not, it doesn't, things don't happen, you know, like immediately, like cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. Things happen in cycles for different reasons, right? It could be like, you know, when it comes to harvest, right? Because the sun is in a certain, the angle of the earth compared to the sun creates more sunlight or less exposure to sun, which creates different seasons like summer, winter, fall, spring again. And then summer, winter, fall, spring again, right? So if there are cycles to things, then when you plant, you realize that when you harvest, whatever that harvest is, right? Whether that's collecting the A that you're going to get in this class, or A+, right? Or collecting, you know, your diploma. It's not the thing that you did right before that got you that thing. It's all the things that came before. It was the winter where you stored the seeds. It was the spring when you planted the seeds. It was the summer where you weeded the fields and tilled the toil and fertilized it. And when fall comes and you collect your harvest, it's because everything that came before. So you have to understand that things are cyclical. Processes are cyclical. When it comes to your work too, it's cyclical. And so that's part of trusting in that process, okay? All right, so at the same time, right? Let's say you trust the process. You got, you know, and you're like, I'm gonna hit this rock and I'll do it forever, right? What about evolution? What about change? Can we get better at pushing our rock up the hill, right? Like, don't you get bored of doing the same thing over and over again? What if you can get better at pushing the rock up the hill? What if you can push it up faster, okay? How do you change? How do you get better at it, okay? And that's what I want to lecture about today. So sorry about the long preface, but this is what we're gonna talk about today, which is this idea of deep work. Okay, so Deep Work is a book by Cal Newport. Cal Newport is a professor of computer science at Georgetown. But he's also a sort of, I guess he's part of that kind of self-help / productivity kind of world of publishing. But he's very prolific, and he spent a lot of time in graduate school writing out these blogs about how to study, how to do well, how to succeed professionally. And because he works from a sort of computer science background, he kind of looks at it from a very he doesn't write this way, but I can tell because I've taken some computer science classes that he thinks about it as in like object-oriented programming. So as in like you're kind of programming yourself to work very, very deeply. And he came up with these kinds of rules and an explanation why. Now, I know that sounds very, very divorced from what we do in the humanities, but I think that it can be very helpful to all of us, no matter what field you work in, okay? And then I'll talk about the criticisms about this at the end, okay? But I recommend this book, and this, from here on out, will mostly be a review of, of the justifications, the rationale, the rules, how it works, how it's worked for me, okay? And hopefully how it might work for you too, okay? And how it might help you alleviate your anxiety, help you to kind of go for it and continue with your growth mindset, but with some sorts of, tactics to improve your ability to do this work and to do it well and to enjoy it and to thrive, to live in a state of eudaimonia, okay? So I bought this book at Tenping, S-Lite, but I think it's available in a lot of bookstores. You can also get it online. You can also get the ebook, okay? So I highly recommend it. So all of the quotations from here on out will be from this. Well, not all of them, but most of it will be come for this book. So, if you want to get the actual text, I recommend you look through it, okay? All right, so here we go. So I want to start with a quotation that's attributed to Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if it's true or not, okay? But this is what he said. He said, "If I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 6 of them sharpening my axe." Now, why would you do that, right? If you were working hard, right? Wouldn't you just spend all 8 hours chopping at that tree? But Abraham Lincoln, or those who like to use this quotation, are making an argument that you will always you will run out of time, right? You only have 8 hours. That's limited, okay? And you can only do so much in that 8 hours. But your axe can always be sharper. Okay, so that means that if you spend the majority of your time getting your axe sharper, then the time when you do actually start chopping, that chopping will be that much better. So basically, what I'm trying to say then is that sharpening your focus, okay, your ability to work deeply, okay, to work hard, to focus, will multiply your strength so that the time you spend will actually be more productive, more efficient, stronger, okay? So I want you to think about this as a lesson in how to sharpen your axe so that when you actually do go about doing the work that you want to do, whatever it is, it's better, it's stronger, okay? It's multiplied, all right? So your mind is a tool. You can sharpen it, and the sharper it is, the deeper you can go, then the stronger and the more efficient the work you will do, okay? Now, that's not easy, okay? That's not easy. Sometimes it's actually easier to just be like, oh, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to plan, okay? So instead, I'm just going to start taking my axe and just start hacking away at it. But what I'm trying to say is sharpening your focus will make it easier and more efficient when the time comes. And this is just a metaphor, right, of sharpening your axe. But really, if you think about it, if your project was to chop down a tree, you wouldn't just hack at it, right? You'd spend time planning how you're going to chop it, deciding where you're going to chop, also sharpening your axe, but also thinking about where do you want it to land? Where do you want to cut? And how are you going to cut? How many cuts is it going to take? All of that will actually multiply the strength of your activity, of your energy, of your work, okay? So what is deep work? Deep work, according to Newport, and this is his terminology, but obviously people have been doing what he calls deep work forever, okay? Deep work is not something new. He's just created this kind of buzz term that I think is quite useful, actually, okay? So says that deep work is professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. So he says professional activities, but I actually think you can do deep work with almost anything, okay? But we'll talk more about that later. But the important thing is that it's distraction-free concentration that pushes your cognitive capabilities. So imagine the kind of hardest you've ever kind of focused, whether it was like some sort of exam or, you know, sometime right before you had to submit a paper or something like that, where you were so focused in concentration that afterwards you finished, you were just exhausted. But you did something that you'd never been able to do, and you know would be very hard to do again. That's deep work. Okay. So now, how do we do deep work? Why is deep work important? Why is it valuable? Okay. So deep work is opposed to shallow work, which Newport argues, and I think it's probably true. Most people do, and most people spend most of their time doing, right? So when people say they're very, very busy, most of the time they're doing what he calls shallow work, okay? So this is non-cognitively demanding, logistical style tasks, often performed while distracted. These efforts tend to not create much new value in the world and are easy to replicate. So for example, right, like let's say your work is to, you know, look at emails and respond back and forth and give quick answers. That's shallow work, okay? It's not very demanding. If you can do your work while you're watching TV or watching YouTube or, you know, listening to a podcast, then it's not cognitively demanding. It's not hard, okay? And honestly, it's something that will be easy to replicate later, okay? That means that like one day AI or machines, if not already, will really be able to do it, okay? Algorithms can do it, that kind of thing. So shallow work is not productive for you individually. Okay, and it doesn't create much new value in the world. It just makes things kind of more efficient, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Okay, and we'll talk more about this. So this is Newport's thesis statement, his hypothesis, right? The ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare. At exactly the same time, it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. As a consequence, the few who cultivate this skill and then make it the core of their working life will thrive. So he's arguing that basically right now, this ability to do deep work is something that fewer and fewer people can do. And yet at the same time, it's becoming more and more valuable, the products of deep work in our economy. So if you become really, really good at deep work, no matter what you choose to do, when it comes to your work life, then you will succeed, you will thrive, okay? But his argument goes further than that, though. It's not just about, you know, doing well and making lots of money, for example, or succeeding in whatever it is you choose to do. It's also that a deep life is a good life. Doing deep work actually makes you happier. It actually makes you more fulfilled. It actually leads to greater contentment and in all that you do, okay? And we'll talk more about why he thinks that is. So his first argument number one, deep work is valuable, okay? So I think this one's pretty obvious. I've talked about this in some classes that I've guest lectured for others about the future of our economy. And this is becoming more obvious now, right? With coronavirus, right? And the self-quarantine, but who's gonna win in our new economy? Our economy is an information economy now. Not for everyone, but if you're watching this, then yes, you are part of an information economy, okay? And who's gonna win in this economy? It's two groups, okay? One, those who can work creatively with intelligent machines. So that means that if you can code algorithms and you can code AI, or you can work with machines and you understand how to work creatively with them. That means, you know, getting them to do things that they haven't done before, using them to create things, you know, to do different kind of stuff, okay? People who do that will succeed, and then stars in their field. So that means you don't have to work with machines, okay? You could be the world's, if you're the world's best glass maker, then you will make it, okay? You're gonna win in this field. So you need to either be working with kind of machines and AI, because that's gonna revolutionize the economy, okay? Or you need to be at the very, very best, the cream of the crop in whatever field you're in. So if you're a, you know, teacher or a nurse, or I don't know, a driver even, or even, you know, like let's say you sell bottles of, you know, or you recycle. and you recycle plastics, if you are the best at that, if you are a superstar in that field, then you will win in this economy, okay? Unfortunately, it looks like others will be left behind unless, our governments, and everyone gets their act together, but we'll talk more about that later, okay? But this is for you, right? Because you are part of that privileged group who can do deep work, okay? If you're watching this, you're part of that group, okay? So like Epictetus would say, if a plum falls in your lap, you should eat it. But you shouldn't, go around craving and desiring more plums, okay? But you have an opportunity, so take the challenge, okay? So why is it that deep work is valuable? And he means economically valuable, okay? Deep work unleashes the core abilities for thriving in the new economy, okay? So those two things, okay, are the ability to quickly master hard things, okay? So if you want to learn how to code robots, okay, you have to be able to master difficult things, okay? And you need to be able to do it quickly, right? So one of the arguments people have made is that in order to master any task or any skill, whether that's like golf or, a language, you need 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to lead to mastery. Okay, so there's arguments back and forth about whether it's actually exactly 10,000 hours, what count, but I think that what Newport is saying is that what matters more is this definition of deliberate practice. What is deliberate practice? So when you deliberately practice something, okay, and the kind of idea they're talking about is like, everyone who's a master of the violin or the cello or, cooking, they spend 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, okay? Like I said, the hour number isn't what matters. What matters is the deliberate practice. And what is deliberate practice? It's focused attention on the task, right? That means no distractions, okay? And feedback on the performance in order to pay even closer attention to what's most productive. Okay, you need both of those. Okay, so the ability to quickly master hard things will allow you to thrive in the new economy. And then two, the ability to produce at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed. Okay, so it's not just high quality work is how much time you spend on it, but also the intensity of your focus. Okay, so what we're going to work on then is intensity of focus, because your time spent is one, it's not entirely under your control, right? You have limitations. We all have limitations on our time. But then even when you don't have limitations on your time, like when you're, quarantined because of COVID, it seems like you still aren't producing a lot of work. Why is that? And that's because the intensity of focus is not there. Okay, your two variables, one variable time is not working. If your time spent is 1 million, right? But your intensity of focus is 0, then the outcome is going to be 0. Okay, so you can't increase your time, right? You can't get more time to chop down that tree, but you can sharpen your blade. You can increase the intensity of your focus. And being able to do that will create high quality work, which will allow you to be a star in your field, whatever that is, okay? So deep work unleashes these core abilities, okay? So number two reason why deep work, is so important, okay, is deep work is rare. Deep work is rare. One of the reasons why deep work is rare is because institutions, whether that's, your bank, the business that you work for, or the university that you go to school at, or any number of institutions, the government, okay? They cannot quantitatively, so that means like numerically, measure how much, one, an individual helps their bottom line, okay? So that means like, it's very, very hard to quantify how much you as an individual are helping them make money, or whatever it is that their bottom line is. Two, okay? They also cannot quantitatively measure how much hyperconnectivity helps their bottom line. And what I mean by that is everyone being networked together. Everyone being connected by email, having all these network tools, okay, being able to ping back and forth with other workers. Now you can, obviously that helps, right? Because then you can share knowledge faster, right? But then how much does it help? Can you know, right? And the converse, not the converse, but the benefit of hyperconnectivity is that everyone can be connected and they can share information really quickly. But then at the same time, one of the things that Newport is arguing is that you also cannot measure how much the distraction of being hyperconnected hurts the bottom line as well. So because you cannot measure this, he calls it like a metric black hole, then what happens is that people tend to do what's easiest at the moment, okay? So he says, without clear feedback on the impact of various behaviors to the bottom line, we end up following the principle of least resistance, which is we tend towards easier activities in the moment, and that drives us towards what he calls shallow work, okay? So if your institution, right, cannot actually measure how good or how bad, qualitative, how much you're helping them, then there's not going to be any feedback, about what type of work you should be doing. So everyone's just going to do what's easiest at that moment, right? Which is going to, not everyone, but there's going to be a tendency. And that tendency is going to be towards shallow work, which means that those who are doing deep work will be rarer and rarer and rarer because of that. And this is a big problem, right? A lot of institutions have this problem because obviously, even though two people are paid the same amount, they're not going to be doing the same amount of work and they're not going to be helping out as much, but there's no way to kind of measure that. It's very difficult to, at least, okay? And that's why you have these kind of outsized CEO payments, right? Where, like these CEOs are like, everything is because of me, right? I'm the reason why the bottom line, where their kind of Trump is kind of attitude. And so then they get, millions and millions of dollars, in their salary and bonuses and stuff, right? But you can't quantitatively measure how much that individual is doing, okay? So we need sort of, but without that clear feedback then, right, people tend to do what's easier at the moment. And this is also your bosses or whatever. It's like, well, I'm not sure whether or not what you're doing is helping, so just do it, right? And you're going to tend towards shallow work, okay? And then what happens is this kind of shallow work, or what he calls like busyness, right, means looking busy, or doing these things like, oh, I was working all day, but what were you doing? Oh, I was on my email, navigating, getting appointments or clarifying things with people or going over things or making sure that they understood something, etc. This kind of shallow work becomes a proxy for productivity. So people think like, oh, I spent 20 hours today. Oh, I spent 20 hours a day on supporting someone else, teaching them how to use their Microsoft Word or something like that, okay? That becomes a proxy for productivity. You're not actually necessarily doing something that helps the institution, but you've been busy the whole time. And so because you've been busy the whole time, you think you should be paid for all that time, right? Or something like that. So anyway, the idea is that deep work becomes rarer and rarer because we can't quantify how much deep work individuals are doing and how that helps, okay? So, and another thing too is that many companies, and not just companies, but social media companies specifically, they like shallow work because it enables the companies to grow because it creates more weak connections. Right, so this has to do with kind of network theory, but the idea is that like let's say, for example, the best thing you could possibly do for a company, right, that you don't necessarily work for, but you kind of do, is like Facebook, where you just go on there and you just kind of like and dislike a bunch of things, right? You don't need to think, right? It's just very shallow, but you are doing work because you're giving information to that company, and that company is able to grow because of that kind of information. It creates these kind of weak connections, right? But then it also hinders your personal production of value. Okay? So the idea then is that deep work is rare. Okay? And because deep work is rare, right, and it's also becoming more valuable, right, that actually gives you an advantage. As an individual, you have an advantage because you will kind of be at that point where there's something that's very few people are doing it and it's harder to do, so that you can kind of fill that niche and become, like a star in your field, for example. At the same time, these companies, they don't really know how to quantify. So then it's kind of, they'll do things like, oh, you need to be at your desk at 8:30 and you need to leave by 6 p.m. Okay, and that's how they measure how much work you're doing. But how do they know how shallow or how deep the work you're doing during that time is? So doing deep work is something that will help you, okay? And it could hurt institutions, but it's sort of your personal advantage. Okay? So lastly, and I'm going to spend most of my time talking about this, and I think that this is really the most important thing, okay? So, and more important than the economic reasons why you should do deep work, okay? And that is, you are what you pay attention to. You are what you pay attention to. Okay. So what does that mean? Okay. And this is written, and this is quotations from Winifred Gallagher, who is a neuroscientist. But basically, the skillful management of attention is the sine qua non of the good life. It's the way, okay? And the key to improving virtually every aspect of your experience. So who you are, what you think, feel, and do, what you love is the sum of what you focus on. So if you focus on negative things, like, the world is ending, then yeah, you're gonna be very, very happy. And you're going to be an unhappy person. You're going to think unhappy thoughts. You're going to feel and do things that reflect that unhappiness. And I hate to say it, but you're going to love unhappiness too. So, but if you focus on what is good, what is positive, then it will change it'll change what you think, what you feel, what you do, and what you love. So when you lose focus, your mind tends to fix on what could be wrong with your life instead of what's right. Therefore, I'll choose my targets with care and give them my rapt attention. In short, I'll live the focused life because it's the best kind there is. So what you focus on, what you pay attention to, really matters. And if you're going to understand one thing from this whole lecture, I recommend that you understand this, that whatever it is that you focus on and pay attention to is what you will be, what your life will be. So choose wisely. Don't let others choose for you. Now, not everyone has that privilege, but if you're watching this, you do. So choose wisely. Okay, so argument number 3, and I think this is the most important reason. Okay, deep work is meaningful. Deep work will allow you to thrive, not just because it makes you more economically viable, but because it actually grants you more meaning in your life. So Newport uses 3 different kind of ways to approach how it is that deep work creates more meaning in your life. One is the neurological. Okay, so Winifred Gallagher, who we just quoted, is a neuroscientist, and she's done many, many studies. And these studies show that people who focusing on the positive period makes people happier. They've done brain scans on this, okay? So your mood is determined by attention, not your circumstance. Have you ever met someone who's like, like a cancer patient or something like that, but then they're like super happy, right? It's because they focus on what matters to them, what makes them happy, okay? So you cannot control what happens to you, right? Circumstances, life happens, okay? But you can determine what you want to focus on about it. So just like Sisyphus, you could be like, oh, this is terrible. Why do I have to roll my rock up and down this hill over and over again, right? Or you could focus on, I really like this rock. I really like this feeling of rolling it up the hill. And after I roll it up the hill and then I let it go and it rolls down the hill, it's so awesome. So your mood is determined by attention to what do you focus on? So that's another thing too, then, is if you're focused on the circumstances of your life, whether it's, these negative things like, I have bad health, or I'm unhappy, or I'm not doing well, or my romantic situation is good. This will lead to anxiety, right? That's because that's what you're focusing on. And that's a productivity killer. And that will disable you from doing the things that really matter to you. So for example, then, and I mean that on a very big scale. Okay, a very wide scale way of thinking about it. But I also mean this on a very minor kind of work-related scale, okay? And this is what Newport's saying is, if you spend all day giving your attention to social media or email, your brain will construct a worldview dominated by stress, irritation, frustration, and triviality, okay? If you spend all your time paying attention to what's wrong in the world, then your brain is going to think that your life is terrible. Okay, even though your particular life might not be that bad. Okay, so whatever you focus on is what you're gonna feel, and your brain is gonna construct the world that you live in. Okay, so it's very important to focus on things that matter to you, that are important, that are valuable, okay, and that are positive, okay? And we'll talk more about this in the critique section, right? Secondly, okay, so aside from neurology, right, from psychology, there's an argument about what's called the flow state, okay? And what Newport is saying is that deep work leads to flow state, or just people just call it flow. Okay, so this is very big in these kind of productivity circles. Okay, but flow, right? You all know what flow is. Okay, flow is being in the zone. Flow is that moment when you're whatever you finally put away all the distractions and you're just like totally focused on whatever it is that you're doing, and time just flies. And you look at your clock and you're like, holy cow, it's been 2 hours, or whatever, but it just feels like 2 minutes, right? That means that you're in that state of incredible focus, okay? And the ways to get into this flow state is something that requires a high challenge. So it needs to be highly difficult, but also requires high skill, okay? So, it can't be something that's easy. It has to be something that's hard, that's difficult, but also very challenging, right? That leads to you being in the zone, okay? So, and what happens is the more flow that we're in, the greater life satisfaction we have. That's what their findings are in psychology. Because for some reason, okay, our minds like to be challenged. We like that sense of working, of being in that state of flow, okay? A lot of people get into flow when they play video games, for example, or play games, right? Cool, but it doesn't have to be something that others choose for you, like a video game. It can be something that you choose for yourself, okay? And another thing that flow does is, because when you're in flow, it actually makes you happier. The more flow you're in, then the happier your life is, or the more satisfied you are with your life. That's what they found with psychological studies. So what this means is that if you cultivate an intense focus, it leaves less room for irrelevancy or worrying. If you spend, 2 hours in flow, then the rest of the day, I'll be like, whatever. I already spent 2 hours doing this thing. And everything else just seems a lot easier to deal with. And this is something I found in grad school. It was, there's always a struggle for grad students, to get their work done, okay? But what I found is, and I'm not saying I solved it, okay? I was still, had a lot of trouble, right? But when I was in those periods where I was writing every day is when I was happiest. Even though the thing that I was always dreading when I wasn't writing was needing to write, okay? Which is one of those weird paradoxes, right? But being in flow increases your life satisfaction. And then when you and it almost reached this point where it's like when you finish that paper, you're kind of sad because you don't have that flow anymore and you're still looking for that, okay? All right, so those are the first two reasons, okay? Neurology, okay, neuroscience, and psychology, okay? Now the last reason is philosophical. And this is one that I really kind of I really want to impart upon you, especially during this time, okay, of coronavirus, where many of you are stuck at home. There's something meaningful that comes about through the acts of deep work. Okay? And part of deep work then is this commitment to craftsmanship. This idea that what you're doing is very, very difficult and hard, and only you could do it, or to do it this way, and requires everything you've got to get it done well. There's something very sacred about that. Okay, so I'm going to go into this in depth, but I want you to look at right now. What you see in the screen is you see these kind of stones, right? And these stones are kind of fitted together. Now, this is actually from a wall in Cusco, and it's an example of Inca architecture and their specific type of masonry. So the Inca, their architecture is quite special in that they would do this work where they would actually cut stones to fit together like puzzle pieces. Okay, so if you look at these stones right now, you can see that this stone in the center, right, has what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges. Okay, and they're rounded and they're fitted together next to each one, right? So these are like puzzle pieces. Now imagine how long it would take if you only had like metal tools. Okay, you don't have machines. And remember, the New World, in the Americas, they didn't have the wheel, right, until the conquistadors came. So that means they did this all by hand and with metal, just chipping away at stones. over and over and over again to get them to fit to each other. So these stones and this is another thing, right? This is stone, right? So it's not just a flat surface. It's not like these kind of, it's not like the cheap stone that you see, you know, where it's actually a wallpaper. No, behind this is huge bricks, right? Huge stones. Each of these stones is like tons, okay? And behind it, it also needs to be shaped together. Now, what created is these kind of walls that they created, you know, like are almost like impossible to kind of destroy, because they took so much work into crafting it together, okay? So when the conquistadors first came in, they believed that actually, you know, that the Inca didn't actually do these, that it was actually the God who had kind of made this happen, because there's no way these primitive people could have done this, right? But actually they did, and it took them hundreds of years. So one person could spend their entire lifetime doing just this stone, or shaping just this stone with this stone to making it fit. But because of this, like these stones, you could like shoot a missile into it and like it wouldn't destroy, like it wouldn't fall apart. Like during earthquakes, it just kind of moves a little bit, but then it stands its ground, okay? Because these rocks have been shaped together. This take hundreds of years, okay? So even though you might say by today's standards that their engineering is quite primitive, okay, that, you know, it's very old, even today we can respect their craftsmanship. Even today we look at it and you're like, wow, that took so much work, so much effort, so much dedication, even just rounding these stones, right? Right, this is not wood. You can't just use sandpaper. They're chipping away at it and polishing it by hand, hundreds of years, okay? And then for the Inca, right, this was also sort of their sort of dedication. It was a show of, one, their power, right? Because you can get, you know, thousands of slaves to get them to do this laborious work, you know, their whole lifetimes. But it was also quite sacred, right? It's a sort of dedication, you know, made in their temples. So it's also a way of sort of connecting for them with their gods. So this is a quotation from a blacksmith who works on things like medieval swords. And he doesn't do it because he needs swords. He does it because the craftsmanship gives him some kind of deep meaning. Okay, so he says, what may take me 100 blows by hand can be accomplished in one by a large swaging machine. I don't know what that is, okay, but this is the antithesis of my goal. And to that end, all my work shows evidence of the two hands that made it. Okay? And these stones, okay, and this wall, right, and this is just one little tiny part of this enormous wall, shows evidence of the many, many thousands of hands that made it, okay? So there's something very deep about this, something very meaningful about that, to know that you are not, quote unquote, alienated from your labor, okay? That you are connected to what you do, that this craft shows the hands that made it. And maybe it could have been done by something else faster, but it's different because you made it, and it shows evidence that only you could have made it, okay? So this is another thing to think about then is, and this is from the quarry workers' creed. A quarry is, you know, where they cut stones out of the rock, okay, where, you know, out of the earth, right, and they cut it out. So we who cut mere stones must always be envisioning cathedrals. So you have to imagine that the people who were working on this stone, okay, yes, they were forced to do it, but at the same time, there's also this sense that they were working on this holy project, that they were making something that would bless them, that would connect them to the gods, okay, that this thing will last, it will transcend, okay? So even when you are just cutting a stone and you're just chipping away on the side, right? So whoever did this little joint right here spent, you know, like months just trying to get these two pieces together right here. That person who was doing it, if it held sacred meaning for them, that means that they were envisioning the cathedral, the temple that would happen afterwards. Okay, and you may never see it 100 years later, right? But still, when you cut stones, if you want it to be sacred, if you want to have it, you know, and cut stones, right, is a metaphor, right? But when you're doing deep work, you need to be envisioning cathedrals. So here's the example of the Inca architecture, and this is the photo, okay? So click on those if you're interested in learning more about it. It's really fascinating, you know. Even the walls, like of like the Sun Temple, for example, you know, the conquistadors, they built their buildings on top of it because it was so sturdy, so strong, okay? And they don't replicate it today. Instead, they use machines, but it's just not the same, Okay, every single one of these rocks was crafted. Okay, it's incredible. All right, so deep work is meaningful. Why? Because deep work, right, this sense of craftsmanship, this commitment to what you do, reignites a sense of sacredness. Okay, and this is very, very important, especially in our current kind of, okay, Hubert Dreyfus and Kelly, okay, these are two very famous philosophers, talk about is the Enlightenment leads to a sort of alienation, because one, there's a lot of good things that happen with this enlightenment because then we focus on the individual, right? The individual has autonomy, the individual has human rights, okay? But at the same time then, the individual, it's up to them to seek certainty, okay? They need to decide what is sacred, what is real, what is important, what matters, okay? Because there's no more, there's no kind of, before it used to be like the God tells you what matters or king tells you what matters, okay? And you trust him. But now, because of the Enlightenment, we're stripped, the world is stripped, okay? To strip the world of the order and the sacredness essential to creating meaning. So what that means is we have tasked ourselves to identify what's meaningful and what's not. And I think that's where many of you, I imagine, because I lived in this state for many, many years, are also at. What's the meaning? What's the meaning of my life? What am I supposed to do with myself? How do I know what's meaningful and what's not? And I can't go to a church to tell me. I can't go to a king to tell me. I have to decide myself. So what does that lead to? Well, in some cases, it leads to nihilism, where you're disconnected. Nothing means anything. I'm alienated from everything. There's no real meaning to anything at all. Right? And this is a very tough way to live, a very empty, very sad way to live. Okay? But Dreyfus and Kelly are saying, but there is a source of sacred in life. Okay? And that's in craftsmanship. Where the source of your meaning does not have to be something that comes from within, right? It does not have to be your individual will, right? You don't all have to be Nietzsche's Übermensch, okay? Your source of meaning could be something that's outside of you. And it can come from craftsmanship. For many, it can be from community organizing, which also can be a craft, okay? But this idea that there's something that you do where you find meaning in it, okay? So many people are starting to do things like baking right now, right? There's something very meaningful about baking a loaf of bread. Okay? There's a meaning that comes from that. Can be quite sacred. Okay? So what Dreyfus and Kelly say is the task of a craftsman is not to generate meaning, okay? But to rather cultivate in himself or herself, say, the skill or themselves, okay, to cultivate in themselves the skill of discerning the meanings that are already there. So what this basically means is if you are crafting, right, you are finding meaning that's in the craft, in the work that you do. Okay? And I think that this is true when you really go deep into something. You find out more and more about it. You find out more and more about the work, Imagine the way that Sisyphus understands his rock, and how he understands the hill, and how he understands the descent. There's so much that's special and unique about that he knows and no one else knows because of that work that he did, that he put into figuring that out. So when you do deep work and you are a craftsman and you dedicate yourself to that craft, you're not alone. What you work on has meaning. Each rock is special and unique. And by working that rock, you discern its meaning. So the meaning of your life does not have to come from something that you figure out inside of yourself. It can be from something that you do and you learn from that, and that it offers meaning to you, okay? So any pursuit then, anything that you do can be a craft, and thus a means to connect with the sacred. Okay? So as long as you hone your ability and apply it with respect and care, okay? So, and you need to be committed to working deeply on it. So, and those of you who are like fans of cooking, maybe there was a documentary a few years back called I think it's called Jiro Loves Sushi, something like that, okay? About, this master sushi chef and how he dedicated his entire life in a very sacred way to creating the perfect sushi, okay? Now, of course, he's a grand master who's done deep work his whole life on this particular thing. But what I found most interesting in that documentary was there was an apprentice. And the apprentice had been working in the kitchen for 10 years. And the apprentice said, after 10 years, they finally let me cook the egg. And then he does the egg. And you can almost tell he's like going to cry because it's so sacred. It's something that he dedicated so much of his life to. 10 years in order to make egg. And yet, you don't see him complaining. You don't see him saying, you know, like, oh, this sucks, it's terrible. Instead, he cries from joy. There's something sacred and deep, okay, about the fact that he put in all this work to make this extraordinary egg that he was only capable of doing after 10 years of deep work, okay? So Newport is saying is you don't need a rarefied job. You can make egg, okay? You need instead a rarefied approach to your work. That will create a sense of sacredness. And I don't think it's any, like, I don't think it's a, how would I put this? I would say that it's not a coincidence that many people, you know, these kind of like the scholars, especially in the medieval ages, right? You know, all the philosophers, many of them were deeply religious, you know, they had these kind of like sense that the work that they do is very sacred, you know, and look at a cathedral or, you know, like the temple, you know, in Cusco, or, you know, yeah, even great music, right? Like A Love Supreme, John Coltrane's, you know, one of the greatest jazz albums of all time, you know, that for him was a very sacred thing because he wrote it as a sort of a sort of album about the love of God, right? There's something about sacredness of the work that you do that generates a deep meaning for your life. And that deep meaning may be what you're looking for. But what I'm saying is one of the ways to find it is by doing deep work, okay? By attributing sacredness to what you do and giving it the respect and care that it deserves. Okay? So now that you know the reasons why deep work, why to do deep work, why deep work, right? It's valuable, it's rare, but most importantly, in my mind, it's meaningful. Okay? Even something like writing an essay, writing the best essay you possibly can will actually give you a sense of meaning in your life. And I think that that's really important, okay? So now that we know the arguments for deep work, if you don't buy those arguments, you can just skip to the critique at the end, or you can just, you know, stop watching now, okay? But now that we know that deep work is meaningful, now you know it's like, okay, well, if I do deep work, then I will thrive, right? Well, it's not so much a question now of what to do, right? If doing deep work is really what will kind of help you thrive in your life, it's how to do deep work, okay? All right, so this is the tough part, right? This is always the tough part, right? It's easy to understand something in theory, right? Hypothetically, it's hard to put it into practice, but here are the kind of ways to put it into practice, okay? So the first thing to understand is discipline will set you free. That sounds like a paradox, but it isn't. It's actually the way that the process works. The more disciplined you are about what you do, then the more freedom you will have. Now, whether that's like, financial freedom, you know, if you want to be able to buy whatever you want or to, you know, do whatever you want, whether that's kind of freedom with your time, if you want to be able to, you know, go play games all day, or if you want to be able to sleep in, okay? The only way you're going to be free to do those things is if you're disciplined when you do everything else, okay? So discipline will set you free. So this is from Jocko Willink. He's one of those kind of self-help kind of gurus as well, right? But I think the way he brands this, okay? Everyone, okay, you can ask your great-grandparents, okay? They will also tell you that discipline will set you free, okay? You don't need Jocko Willink to tell you. But I think the way he phrased it is pretty good. While discipline and freedom seem like they sit on the opposite sides of the spectrum, they're actually very connected. Freedom is what everyone wants, to be able to act and live with freedom, okay? He goes on to say this, but I'll just tell you, but discipline is the way that you're able to act and live with freedom, to actually do what it is that you want to do. You have to have discipline in order to do it. Now, why? Why is that, right? So one is because you have a finite amount of willpower, and that becomes depleted as you use it. And they've done neurological studies on this, okay, psychological studies. But the key to developing a deep work habit is to move beyond good intentions, okay? It's not about what you intend to do. Okay, it's not about what you want to do at that moment. It's creating routines and rituals to your working life designed to minimize the amount of your limited willpower necessary to transition to and maintain a state of unbroken concentration. Okay, so what is freedom? Freedom is doing what you want, right? But what if you don't even have the energy to know what it is that you want to do, right? Because you use up all your willpower just making yourself doing things that you have to do. So if you make it so that the things that you have to do are easy to do, or there's kind of a structure that's built into that makes it easier to do it, then you'll do it faster, right? So like, well, we're raising a child right now, right? And actually creating this kind of structure into our child's daily life actually makes it easier, for him and for us. It makes him happier, right? So creating a sort of discipline for yourself will set you free, whatever it is that you really, really want. Because think about all the times when you're like, screw it, I'm going to do whatever I want, right? And you're undisciplined. How happy were you? Or were you filled with dread and anxiety? Okay. And I say this from personal experience. Okay. So yeah, discipline will set you free. Okay. All right. So he has 3 rules, right? Now he kind of does this as a sort of like coding, right? So imagine you're coding yourself. Okay. So he comes up with 3 rules. Okay. And some of them are more in depth than others. Okay. But I'm going to try to get through these as quick as possible. Okay. So rule number 1, work deeply. Obviously, right? So how do you work deeply? Okay, so first thing you need to do is you need to schedule your work based on your personal depth philosophy. Okay, so he has 4 different depth philosophies. Okay, I'm not going to I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think that most of you are probably already like a rhythmic philosophy, and I'll explain why. Okay, so and then most of you who are like, if you're an academic, you're probably bimodal. Okay, and if you're a senior academic who never does any service and doesn't care about other people, and probably there's no way anyone who has this philosophy is reading this is monastic. Okay, all right. So the monastic philosophy, right, is it's like you're like at a monastery. So basically, it's like your entire life you live like a monk. So you do not go on the internet. You do not talk to other people. You spend all your time in solitude, like in a cabin in the woods or whatever, and you just make it very difficult for anyone to find you, and you spend all your time working deeply. Okay, and many people, like Newton was like that, for example, right? They say, like, I remember my astro professor in college said that Newton probably died a virgin. He did not care about other people, and when he did figure things out, he didn't even share them. People would like knock on his door and be like, all right, I solved that already, here's the paper, right? He's monastic, he's a monk, he does not want to be around people. Okay, so another kind of way to do this is a bimodal philosophy. So what he means by bimodal is like you have 2 different modes, right? Bimodal, right? One mode is you're on with people and you're in the world, and the other is you're off. Okay, so it's like you have like, maybe like once a month you take a week and you go on vacation somewhere and you don't talk to anybody and you do nothing, you just work. Okay, a lot of professors do that. They lock themselves in their room for a week and they just write. Okay. Many of you probably do that. I'm guessing, you kind of screw around all semester, and then around crunch time, then you just kind of lock yourself somewhere. I used to do things like I would go to like, I would drive, because I used to live in California. I would drive to another city, and then I would like find like a restaurant, or, and I would just like sit in that restaurant. I'd work all day, right? And then I go home and sleep, and then I do the same thing the next day in another city, in another place. Okay, that's like a bimodal philosophy. It's not very like good for your finances, right? But the way that most people do it is a rhythmic philosophy, and that's what I'm trying to do right now, which is every day you have set time where you do your deep work, and then after that, then you do all your shallow work. You're answering emails, you're talking to people. So like right now I'm doing my deep work, which is doing something that's tough, right? Like lecturing and writing lectures. And then after this, then I'm going to get back on the internet and send this out and, answer emails and, do all this kind of other shallow work, right? So my rhythm is deep work, then shallow, then sleep, deep work, then shallow, then sleep, deep work, then shallow, then sleep. And I try to do things in between, but I'll talk more about that later. Okay, and then the last depth philosophy, which is the one that Cal Newport is like, he reifies, is like the best, right? But it's just really, really hard, is the journalistic. Okay, so journalists are amazing because on the kind of like, just like that, they just start writing, because it's like, oh crap, I need to get this out. So it's like suddenly they just turn it on. So at any given time, they can go deep and get super focused and just write and just knock out 1,000 words and then print it. And it'll be really, really good. Okay, so journalists have this kind of capability because they've been trained to write a lot, write very well, and very quickly at any given moment, right? So that's the kind of depth that Cal Newport thinks is the best, where if you can just turn it on at any given time, okay? But that's really hard, okay? And that takes years of practice. But many of you might already be there. Many of you may be journalism students. That's fantastic, okay? All right, so pick one. I would go with rhythmic, but whatever you're at, okay? You need to think about this on your own. Second, okay, is you ritualize. Okay, so you need to craft a deep work ritual. So 3 things to focus on is where you work and for how long. Okay, so this is the space. The space really matters. Like, I used to think that feng shui, is like BS, but it's not, right? Because how your space and how it feels determines how well you work. So if there's lots of distracting stuff in your space, if there's like a TV and a video, and a bunch of people praying, and also a baby running around in the room, yeah, it's not going to work very well. Okay, so you need to determine your space, and your space needs to be organized in a way that works for you. Okay, that kind of emphasizes this. Okay, so, and you only work there for a set period of time, and for how long. Okay, and then you need to figure out your process, how you're going to work once you start to work. Okay, and everyone has a different process, right? But we can go into those possibilities, but you need to develop your own, and you probably have something already going, okay? But you can make it better, you can refine it, okay? And then lastly, how you support your work. So what are your kind of systems, okay? And we'll go over into this, right? But what are the things that will ensure that your productivity is kind of keep going and make it easier to stay productive, okay? It's kind of, unfortunately, this has already been sort of mastered by like Uber and Deliveroo and these kind of groups where they create these kind of systems where it's really, really easy just to pick up another fare, just to do another delivery, because the system is so kind of way. It's just like with Facebook or any other social media. It's so easier to just scroll a little more, and it doesn't feel like work. So you need to create systems of your own that make it so it's easy to just do just another 30 minutes, just do another hour, just do another 5 minutes. These kind of systems that make it easier so you don't have to think, so that all your willpower and mental energy can go into the focus and concentration on the work you're doing. Okay, third is make grand gestures, okay? So you need to commit seriously. So Newport gives examples of like, here's a great example. So Alice Wu is a director. She's an Asian American director. And about 10 years ago, she came out with a really great kind of groundbreaking film called Saving Face. Okay, and it won a ton of awards and really enjoyable film. And then she did not produce anything for the next 14 years. Okay, and I guess she got kind of stuck. I don't know. So what she did was, in order to make sure that her new film got written, which is called The Half of It, which I recommend. It's on Netflix. It's a very enjoyable film. And it's quite good. And very well written, good script, good acting. But anyway, good cinematography too. But she was like, I need to write this. So what did she do? Because she was all kind of like set in her life. Like, before she was a director, she was like I think she worked in tech. So she had money, and she kind of like pseudo retired, but she always told herself, I really want to get this. I would really want to make this next film, but she couldn't really kind of do it. So what she did was she wrote out a check, like a fat check, I know you don't use checks. Okay. But, like she wrote out a check, which is like a money order, in order to pay an organization that she really hates, right? So she really hates the NRA, the National Rifle Association. So she wrote like a $10,000 check, okay? And then she said to her friend, if I don't finish my screenplay by this date, I want you to send that check to the NRA, okay? So basically, like, if you don't finish, the worst thing possible that you ever think you could do, one of the most destructive things that you think you could do will happen, okay? So this kind of grand gesture creates a serious commitment. Right? You go big or go home, okay? Now, to go deep, you often need to go big, okay? So make a grand gesture. For some of you that might be committing to a deadline, like, on this day, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get this done, okay? Or it could be like, you could be like, okay, well, this is not working. So I'm just going to spend the money that's necessary and, buy a new table. So I got a standing desk. So that was like my big kind of go big moment. So I have to like commit because I feel like I spent a lot of money on this. So, okay. All right. So another one is collaborate when appropriate. So the key is when appropriate. So it has to be balanced, right? If you deep work by yourself always, you miss out on opportunities that you're learning from other people, or what some people call like serendipitous creativity. What Newport calls whiteboard effects, where it's like you are seeing what others are doing and you're learning from it, but it also pushes you to work harder, right? But he says that you should use a sort of hub and spoke model. So a hub and spoke is like the center of a wheel, right? The center is the hub where all the kind of spokes of the wheel come together. And the spokes are those kind of little kind of tubes or cylinders, I guess, that come out of the hub and connect to the wheel. So if you have a sort of hub and spoke model, that means that, you know, you do your deep work in like a spoke by yourself, but then you come together in the hub and share, and then you move back and forth. But it has to be balanced, okay? So those of you who maybe work in academia already, this is something that you need to really get good at, is striking up that balance, okay? But for others, you know, if you're a student, then right now it's just focus on deep work, okay? Okay, another part of rule number 1 of working deeply, and this is a big one, is execute like a business, right? So yes, businesses, you know, are not necessarily everything that we want to, you know, emulate. But the one thing that businesses are good at, right, is they're good at delivering, okay? They're good at executing. They're good at getting things done, okay? Because they're modeled and structured to be hyper efficient, okay? So how do businesses execute, okay? And they have kind of, one of them is like what they call a 4DX, is like 4 types of discipline, 4 different disciplines, okay? And these disciplines I think are really important. And you don't have to be a business. You don't have to be working in a business to follow these kind of, to use these methods. And you can use it if you want to take down a big business. Using this business model will help you take down that business, okay? All right, so discipline number 1, and this is key, okay? Focus on the wildly important. Don't do things that are not really, really important to you. Only say yes to tasks that arouse a terrifying longing. Like you really, really want to do it. Okay, that's like so important to you. Like you feel like, oh, like for me when I was thinking about my dissertation, I was like, oh, I have to get my dissertation done. And if I get my dissertation done, I feel like I can die happy. Like I did it. Like, you know, like that thing is done. Now I feel different. Now for me, it's like the book, right? But you want to do tasks that arouse a terrifying longing and focus on those, okay? If you're like, oh, I kind of want to, you know, get really, really good at, I don't know, like at tennis or something. That's not good enough. It's not something that you're like, oh, I'm kind of interested in that. I've always kind of wanted to pick that up. It needs to be like, oh, this is it. Like I've always wanted to do that. Terrifying longing, okay? That's what you focus on, wildly. Okay? And we'll talk more about that later. Discipline number 2, okay? Act on the lead measures instead of the lag measures, okay? So lead measures are things that you kind of can count and see that are happening in real time, okay? Whereas the lag measures are the sort of results, okay? So if we go back to our stone cutter kind of analogy, right? The lead measure would be how many times you hit the rock, okay? So I've hit the rock 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, 9 times. Whereas the lag measure would be like, oh, I split 1 rock, I split 2 rocks, okay? So lag measures are like results. Lead measures are sort of like parts that indicate how efficient you are or what's happening in your process. So you want to act on the lead measures, okay? Because if you act on the lag measures, 1, it takes too long, right? And you kind of lose hope, right? But if you act on the lead measures and you focus on those and how they kind of make your process better, then, you know, you will spend, your kind of deep work will be better, okay? And you'll keep going. So the most relevant lead measure for us, right, is the time spent doing deep work dedicated to your wildly important goal. Okay, so that's what really matters right now. Okay, so don't think about it's like, oh, I wrote 5 papers yesterday. You know, like when I was in high school, it'd be like, you know, people would brag, be like, oh yeah, you know, I wrote a paper last night, you know, like right before it was due. Okay, people who were doing that was me. Okay, and I was an arrogant, stupid person. So don't do that, because that's not what matters. What matters is these lead measures. How much time you spent doing deep work. I want you to brag about, oh, I spent, you know, 100 hours on that essay. Deep work. Okay, deep work. Because it's not about who produces the most papers, okay? But papers are important, and the quantity is important, but it's also the quality. And that quality is going to be determined by the lead measure, right? This deep work, time spent, deep work doing, okay? Number 3, keep a compelling scoreboard, okay? So people play different when they're keeping score, okay? There's just something about that, right? If I told you that your essay will not be great, you know, that you're not going to get a grade on your essay, then you're not going to try as hard, right? Like, you're going to study harder. There's something about keeping score that just makes people work harder or work different. Okay, like, yeah, if you play sports, you know, and like, it's different when you play like in a league and people are counting wins and losses versus if you're just playing for fun. Okay, so you want to have a scoreboard for yourself. Okay, and you want to record that on a physical artifact. Okay, that you can see in your space. It's important that it's a physical artifact. Okay, that it's not on your computer or, you know, on your, you know, or in the cloud. Okay, or on your phone. You want to record it yourself on something physical that you can see in the space. Okay, and the things that you should record, right, are, and we'll talk about this, right, but is your lead measures. How many deep work hours did you do from what time to what time? Okay, and I'll show you. Number 4, create a cadence of accountability. So a cadence is a rhythm. Okay, a cadence is like, you know, the beat. Okay, so you want to have like accountability. You know, so one of those could be like, oh, every week I submit something, or every, you know, but every at the beginning of every week I review. Okay, and this is important. It's important to review, and also it kind of creates a sort of cadence. Is like, oh, you know, last week I got this and this done, but I didn't get this done. You know, so you want to record when you do your weekly review too. Okay, all right, and so here's examples of keeping score. Okay, so these are my cards, you know, excuse the bad handwriting, you know. So you want to have your wildly important goals taped up somewhere. You don't have to use an index card, I did, okay? And these are wildly important. So notice I don't have like answer the email from this student, or I don't have, you know, like, you know, I don't have, I don't know, what are some important goals but not wildly important? I don't have those on there. These are things that will take me years, okay? Like, I don't expect myself to scratch everything off this card until 6, 7 years from now, okay? But that's the idea. These are wildly important, okay? That way you're always focused on that. So everything that you do when you do deep work should be aimed towards one of those things. And then you want to have a deep work scoreboard. So my scoreboard here is I just have a week, and then I tally the number of hours I did in deep work. So this is not the total amount of hours of work I do. Okay, this is just the work hours that I did that were deep work. Okay, and there's a difference, right? And then I also write down the day that I did the weekly review. And one of the ideas here is that when you actually hit one of your lag measures, right? So when you hit one of your wildly important goals, then you would circle the tally that, you know, like where you actually completed that. So for me, my wildly important goal right now that I'm focusing on, and this is part of that, is to complete the semester on time, right? So I'll input the grades, you know, and do all the grading, and then I'll be done, right? And then I can scratch that off, and then I would circle the tally mark. So I assume that would be down here somewhere. I don't know, okay? And I circle and be like, yeah, okay, I did it, and that's my scoreboard, right? And then your results, right? So another thing is how many scorecards do you complete? So this is my first one. I just started trying this on April 13th. Okay, so here we are at May 21st. So let's see how it goes. So, and then we'll see how many deep work hours I was able to do. And then hopefully these scoreboards build up and have more and more and more and more and more. And I'll be able to look back and be like, oh, you know, I achieved this wildly important goal during this. And this will also make me more efficient in my planning in the future. Okay, now your wildly important goals are up to you. Okay, but they need to be something that's kind of clear. But at the same time, the things that you work on, that you think about when you think about how to make yourself more efficient, is not the wildly important goals. Okay, it's the lag measures, the deep work hours, when you did your weekly reviews, etc. Okay, all right. So yeah, yeah, and I'm a bit kind of ashamed of how few hours I have on here, but deep work is hard. Deep work is hard. You're supposed to be exhausted when it's done because you're so focused. Okay, all right. Another thing about rule number 1, work deeply, is be lazy. Okay, this sounds kind of like a paradox, but it isn't. Actually, the lazier you are, then the more energy you have to do deep work when you're supposed to be doing deep work. Okay, and you need to have this kind of off and on. Like if we are coding ourselves, right? So if we're turning ourselves into robots just during this time so we can be free in other times, right? Robots need to shut down. They need to reboot, okay? And you do too. So be lazy, right? Maintain scheduled downtime and be disciplined about your downtime. Playtime is play. You have to do it, okay? Rest time is rest. You must rest, okay? Because if you don't rest, then you won't be able to do deep work. So the reason number one is downtime aids insights. So one of these kind of interesting things, and you've probably noticed this too, is let's say you're writing a paper, okay? And then you're like, okay, I've worked enough on this. You shut everything down, you go to sleep. And the next morning, there's a problem that you suddenly know the solution to. You're like, oh, I know what I should write there. Or, oh, I know what I'm supposed to say on that, right? That's because when you're sleeping, your brain is still working, okay? And this is what's called unconscious thought theory. So basically, when you have something that's very, very complicated and very, very complex, your brain will actually work on it without your active attention, but you need to let it rest and do other things or sleep or whatever so that it solves it. So load up on the relevant information and stop thinking about it. Go to bed, go to sleep, rest, do other stuff. And then when you wake up, you'll know the answer, okay? And this is just because your unconscious mind works on things, okay? Number two, downtime helps recharge energy needed for deep work. So this is called attention restoration theory, right? So like we said before, your willpower, your ability to direct your attention. That means like your ability to focus on whatever it is that you're focusing on is finite, okay? You can only do so much of it. If you exhaust it, then you struggle to concentrate, okay? So you need to restore this, okay, by doing things like you walk through nature, go hiking, you have a conversation. And these things need to happen without needing to direct attention. So if your conversation is stressful, right, or it not necessarily stressful, but it requires work, right, like teaching, for example. Like I know good teaching is conversation, but we still have to direct the conversation and direct the attention. That's still very tiring, okay? So you need to be doing something that's very spontaneous and easy, okay? That, and kind of different, okay? So that your attention can recharge. You recharge those attention batteries, okay? So deep relaxation helps you work deeper the following morning. So some of the hardest working people I know, okay, they do things like do yoga every day, and then they also like take like salt baths and like smell aromatherapy, and they make sure to get massages and things like that, and then they work their butts off the next day, okay, because that deep relaxation helps them, okay, so that the next day they can work deeper, okay. I used to do things where I would just like work, but I become less and less efficient with each hour that I went on. Instead, what I really should have done is rest. Okay, and now that I know that, I feel like I'm actually working better, more productively, more efficiently, okay? So number three, why you really should just shut down for the day and schedule in downtime, okay, is that work that you do during downtime is usually not that important, okay? It's usually not that good anyways, oftentimes very shallow anyway, okay? So by the time the evening comes, if your downtime is in the evening, you should already have exhausted your deep work capacity, okay? You should be exhausted from working because you were working so deep, okay? And if you work when you're tired, that's shallow work. It won't be deep. You don't have that capacity. Your blade is not going to be sharpened. The blade needs to rest. It needs to be sharp, okay? All right, cool. So you understand, okay? Be lazy, right? So one of the ways to be lazy, right, or not necessarily be lazy, but is to really turn off, is to have a shutdown ritual. So Newport says, when you work hard. When you're done, be done, okay? So you need to have like a ritual where you shut everything off, okay? Now this can be short or as long as you want. What he says is you can, I've been trying this, okay, is you kind of go through all the tasks. You look at them and you're like, okay, you need to have a plan for completing that task that you trust, okay? So it's like, okay, yeah, I didn't finish the lecture today, but tomorrow morning it's going to get done because I've scheduled out 2 hours to do it, okay? Keep the plan in a place where you can revisit it when the time is right. So I've been planning this lecture for a long time, but I've been working on it on and off, right? So I had like a stack of papers that I've been taking notes on how to do this lecture, and I would put it away. Now, I don't always take it out every single day, but when I work on it, I look it over one last time, and then I put it away. And I know that when I need it later, like now, I can take it out again and use it again. Okay, so shut everything down, put things away when you are done for the day. And then afterwards, don't do anything work related. Don't check your email, okay? Until your following work day. Don't get sucked back in, right? Because if you do that, then you will not allow your you will not, one, allow your unconscious thoughts to solve things, and two, you will not restore your attention. Okay? All right, so this is one of those things where it's like, actually, if you're disciplined about work and you're disciplined about shutting down, you actually end up having more free time to do things that you want to do. Like for me, it's hanging out with my, with my family. Okay? All right, so rule number 2. Okay, rule number 1 is quite long. Well, these rules get a little bit faster. Okay, boredom, embrace boredom. Boredom is important. Okay, it might be really boring to sharpen your blade, but it's actually very good for you. Okay, boredom is concentration training. Okay, boredom improves your ability to concentrate and overcome desires for distraction. So next time you're waiting in line or you're on the MTR, just be bored. Don't reach for your phone. Okay, don't just sit there or stand there and try to focus on whatever it is, that you want to be mindful about, but don't look for distraction. Okay. Another thing is, another way to think about this is don't take breaks from distraction. Instead, take breaks from focus. Okay. So, practice, your kind of use of different things, like whether that's social media or, checking WhatsApp or playing with your apps and that kind of thing. Only do those during your breaks from focus. Don't do it all the time and then take breaks to do work. Instead, do deep work and then take a break and then go back to doing deep, and take a break, go on social media, whatever, and then go back to working. Okay. Don't instead be like, oh, I'm going to spend all day on social media and then I'm going to take a break from social media and work for an hour. That does not improve your concentration. Okay. So the way to do this, he says, is to schedule in advance when you'll use the internet and then avoid it altogether outside these times. So this can be kind of tough, but I think it actually works really well. This strategy works even if your job requires lots of internet use or prompt email replies, right? So you can kind of be like, okay, one thing you can do, and I use like a Pomodoro technique, which is like I do 25 minutes on of work and then 5 minutes off. So like if you do 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, and during those 25 minutes, you're not on the internet. And then during those 5 minutes, you go on the web, you send email, you check whatever you need to check, and then you stop, okay? And you reply to all those emails and you stop. Remember, another thing you can do during your deep work is if you do have an email that you're worried about answering, you can draft it on paper. You don't have to be in your email inbox, okay? So regardless of how you schedule your internet blocks, you must keep the time outside these blocks absolutely free from internet use, okay? So don't use the internet when you schedule that you're not gonna use the internet, okay? This, yeah, it might be boring, but it's part of sharpening your blade, okay? So schedule your internet use at home as well as work to kind of, it can help you further improve your concentration training, okay? All right, so part 2, embrace boredom. Train your mind like athletes train their bodies, okay? So your mind is a muscle, okay? It can get stronger, it can get faster, it can get sharper, more efficient, okay? But it needs to be trained and also rested, okay? Like athletes don't just work out all the time, they rest a lot, okay? So the same with your mind, you need to rest it, but also you need to create certain types of exercises that will get it, kind of train it to be, faster, sharper, whatever, okay? So Newport offers 3 different things you can do. And of course, many of you probably have your own kind of mental kind of training that you do. But one of those is practice, or he calls it, well, I'm just gonna call this. You can practice racing or sprinting or dashes, okay? And practice pretty regularly, maybe like once a week or once every 2 weeks or something. What you do is you give yourself less time to complete a task and work with great intensity in order to finish on time, okay? And then you try to beat your previous records. So let's say, for example, you're almost done with your essay. Let's say you've got like 2 paragraphs left. Now, normally you'd be like, okay, well, I need to submit this on Friday, so I can spend all day tomorrow doing this. What you can do is instead do a sprint. Be like, okay, I'm going to just do deep work for just 1 hour, okay? And I'm going to only give myself 1 hour to finish these last 2 paragraphs. And then you just turn everything off and just focus, okay, and sprint. And it's like the hardest work that you've ever done, okay? And then you do that every once in a while just to see how much better you're getting at it, how much better at you're getting. Maybe before, you could only do 2 sentences. Now, you can do 2 paragraphs in 1 hour, okay? These are the things that you practice and you get better and better and better at it, okay? So practice sprinting, right? Practice, you can think about it like this. It's like, you can think of your brain having like gears in a car. Sometimes you're in first gear, sometimes you're in second gear, sometimes you're in third gear, right? But you have to build those, just like with endurance sports, right? Like if you run or you swim, you have a first gear, you have a second gear, you have a third gear, but you have to develop those, and that comes with practice and endurance. But in order to develop the higher gears, every once in a while you need to practice it. So, you know, like some people, what they'll do is they'll do like they'll run, right? For, let's say they're doing a 5K. You run a 5K, right? So you run pretty slowly, right? The first, you know, 4.5K, and the last 500 meters, you just sprint, right? And doing that last sprint will actually help you to get better at doing the overall 5K, because every once in a while you're kind of accelerating, okay? So this is something that you can do for your mind too, these kind of periods of intense focus. Another thing is, if you meditate, you know, or think about things deeply, do it productively. So he says, be wary of distractions and looping, and he's got some tips on that. You can look into that, okay? But I think it's better to focus on, well, for us, for our purposes, is to focus on this idea of structuring your deep thinking, okay? So when you structure your deep thinking, instead of being like, oh, think about it, think about it in a structured way. So one, that means review the relevant variables, right? So what are the things that matter, you know, in this problem? You know, what can change? You know, like if you were cooking, right? What are your variables? It's the size of the ingredients, like what size I cut it or something like that. Another variable would be the heat that I use, high heat, low heat. Do I cook it in an oven? Do I cook it in water? Do I roast it? You know, how much time I have. Review all the relevant variables, okay? If it's a paper, then it's like, okay, well, what does the teacher want? How long does it need to be? You know, how much time you have? What options or topics you have, okay? Review the relevant variables. Then you define the next step question. So like, what's next after I know those variables? Well, one is I need to decide, I need to commit to, you know, what these variables give me. Like, so, okay, well, I only have carrots. And my options for carrots are to boil, to roast, to eat raw. So then I define my next step questions, like, well, what matters most to me at this moment? So what would be the next step? And it would be like, well, first, no matter what I do, I still need to peel the carrots, wash and peel the carrots. So that's my next step. And then you consolidate your gains by reviewing the answer with them, okay? And you just kind of rinse and repeat. Do this again and again and again when you do your deep thinking, okay? But you're always kind of moving on to the next step, moving on to the next step, moving on to the next step. And you're always writing down and clearly kind of reviewing your answer, okay? Lastly, you know, mental athletes, they like to do things like memory training, so you can like memorize a deck of cards. But you don't have to do that. There's a lot of things they have, like, you know, and I'm sure you can look it up on the internet. But yeah, you can design an experiment with your own training regimens, okay? I recommend that you do that as well, okay? All right, let's see. Rule number three, quit social media, okay? So social media sucks away your deep work ability. So Cal Newport, since he did deep work, he's still writing, he's still coming up with new stuff. So right now his thing is, you know, he's become like a cultural critic about social media. So you can read about that. But basically social media sucks away your deep work ability. It hijacks your attention, okay? And makes it so you're less able to concentrate, okay? So when it comes to tools then, like your internet habits, he recommends applying the law of the vital few, okay? So instead of being like, oh, I use the internet because it's useful, think about how useful it is to you and what parts of it are actually useful, because you can't really know how much the distraction is hurting you versus the new information is helping you, okay? So with the law of the vital few, that it's the idea is that in many settings, 80% of a given effect is due to just 20% of the possible causes. People call this the 80-20 rule, you know, but basically it's like some of the good stuff that you get from, you know, surfing on Facebook, for example. Like for me, Facebook is a way to kind of network, you know, to learn more about what's going on in the field, to connect with academics, family and friends, you know, to understand more about politics, right? But if I do that all the time, I end up distracted all the time. So I might only need 20% of my time spent on what I was doing, as opposed to 100% of my time on Facebook like before or something like that, okay? So the benefits of the tool must drastically outweigh the detriments, or else don't use it, okay? And, you know, like he says that a lot of deep work people, you know, like really productive people like Malcolm Gladwell, for example, don't even use Twitter. They don't need to, okay? So just think about your tools. Be mindful about how much you use it and whether or not you really need it, or if you're just distracting yourself. Okay, and a lot of times I've noticed with things like Facebook or whatever, or Twitter. I don't really use Twitter, but when you go on Facebook, it's like you only need to go on for like 5 minutes and you're caught up and you're done. You're done. You don't really need to read anymore. Okay. After that, you're just like, distracting yourself because you don't want to do whatever it is that you need to do. Okay. So he says quit. Okay. And that's an option. Okay. It's actually not a bad thing for you to quit. It could be good for you. Okay. All right. Cool. Lastly, he says drain the shallows. So this is more of a problem, I think, for people who actually are working in corporations or institutions. I think it's a problem for young academics. But he has a lot of advice on how to do this. I'm not going to go into all of it. All right, just real quick. Okay, number one is respect your time and other people's time. Okay? So that means that's like the more you care about your own time, then the more you'll care about other people's time too, because that time could be deep work, and deep work is valuable and it's rare. Okay, and deep work is meaningful. So the way that you kind of respect your time and other people's time. Some people are very defensive of their time. They like protect their time. You don't have to be so defensive or territorial about your time, but you do need to treat it with care. Be attentive to it, okay? So then you think about, and then what you want to do is you want to quantify the depth of your activity. You want to do deep work, right? You don't want to do shallow work, right? So you need to ask yourself, how long would it take in months to train a smart, recent college graduate with no specialized training in my field to complete this task? Okay. Now, if the answer is, oh, it would only take, however many hours, then yeah, you don't need to do it. Okay. But if it would take that person, a new person completely new to it, months and months and months of training, then yeah, it's something that you should be doing because it's something that, you are specialized in. Okay. So the longer the time that you estimate would take someone who does not have your training or your specialization to do it, then the deeper the task. Okay. So obviously something like giving a university lecture and studying a book and reviewing it and writing up a lecture, like it would take a lot longer for a recent college graduate to do it than me because I've been doing it for the last 4 years and practicing. Okay, so this is how you quantify that depth. Whereas something like going out to buy soda, right? Like anyone could do that. Okay, and there's no edge that I have that makes me better at that. Okay, so you want to say no to shallow work. Okay, if a robot can do it, do something else. Okay, and I think that that's something to think about in this new economy. Okay, do things that only you can do well, and two, remember this: arouse a terrible longing that endures. Okay, so I added that endures. Okay, so yes, you can have a terrible longing for a hamburger. Okay, but I'm talking about terrible longing that still lasts. Okay. That's something that's the things that you want to be working on. That's the deep work, okay? Lastly, he recommends practicing a fixed schedule productivity. So that means he commits to finishing work by an early time. Like, he says like 5:30, okay? And then he plans backwards from that shutdown time. So what this does, it kind of creates a sort of scarcity mindset. It's like, well, I only have 3 hours left. I only have 1 hour left. I gotta get this done, okay? So that actually gets you to commit to finishing, makes you plan more, okay? And it makes it so that you only say yes to things that matter. So if someone's like, oh, can you fix all the typos in this spreadsheet? Just say no, okay? Or if you can't say no, then schedule it for your shallow time, but spend your deep work time doing deep work, okay? Lastly, develop good email hygiene, okay? I'm summarizing that, okay? There's a lot of stuff on the internet that teaches you how to write better emails. Newport calls it process-centric emails, okay? But basically it's like emails can be a huge time suck, especially if they're not kind of well done. So you want to have good email hygiene, like when you read it, when you don't, how you send it, how you receive it. There's lots of that will actually help you keep your time for deep work, your time to do deep work, okay? All right. I'm not going to go into that, but I'll let you look that up on your own. Okay, so here are my personal findings. Okay, so I've been trying this, as you know, for about a month and a half now. And yeah, I've tried many things, because I'm desperate and I have bad anxiety. But this has worked pretty well. But I'm only at the beginning, right? So we don't know how it goes. But here's the things that I find helpful for me is I begin with a ritual. Okay, it needs to be slow and methodical.
pretty innocuous, not physiologically addictive. Okay, so like every morning, right, you wake up, you brush your teeth, and I make myself a cup of coffee, and I drink that coffee. That is physiologically addictive, but whatever. Okay, and then you might do something like you can meditate, you can pray, you can play free cell, you can chew gum, and then you need to start the timer. Okay, I use a Pomodoro timer, but you can use whatever you want. Start the clock. And getting started has always been the hardest part for me. So I need that ritual to start. Okay, so after you've started, think about the problem. Okay, start with the how instead of the what. It's not what I need to do, it's how am I going to do it. Okay, if you work with the how, that's actually going to be more productive. It's going to help you get to do whatever it is that you need to do. Okay, and for me, I need to keep it fun. Okay, I need to discover and be learning new things as I'm doing it. So I like to focus on solving problems. So I approach everything as a problem, like a puzzle or a game. Okay, and then all the deep work that I do, I see it as a sort of experiment to test out my hypotheses about that problem. And then, when I see how much time it takes or how well it got done or whatever, then that's my sort of data, and I write that down. Right? So if I'm like, oh, I can do this lecture, or I can do all of this deep work lecture in 6 deep work hours, okay, then that's my hypothesis. Then I test it by doing it, right? And then I record my data, and then I interpret the findings. It's like, no, it took much longer. And then I try to brainstorm new solutions afterwards, right? So that's my review. I'm like, okay, well, it went slow because blah, 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 blah. Or this could have gone better, this could have gone worse, whatever. Okay, and then you generate, or this is what I do, I generate and revise templates for the process, right? So I rinse and repeat. So last time I did it using this, I wrote that down. Okay, I'm gonna try this again, but do it this way. So that way you're not always reinventing the wheel. You're kind of creating templates for yourself that work for you. So it's like this time when you write an essay, maybe use this structure. You can try that structure again. I will send you a template for essay structures, for long essay structures, okay? So you can use those if you want, but you might want to design your own. And always think about the how and focus on problems and how to solve them. Okay, it's way more fun. Okay, incorporate rest. This is really important. This has always been a problem for me because I've always been sort of a binge worker, a binge exerciser. So I have problems with that. So I need to incorporate rest. So what I do is I use transitions between things. So like I'm going to do 2 hours of work, then I'm going to exercise. And then I'm going to do another 2 hours of shallow work or whatever, and then I'm going to eat, and then I'm going to shower, and then I'm going to sleep, and then I'm going to talk to my mom or my sister or my brother or my father or my family or whatever. And I use transitions, right? So it's like after those 2 works are done, I open my door. So if my baby wants to walk in and hang out with me, that's okay. So these transitions allow your brain to turn on and off, okay? And then, yeah. And one of those things is I shut down my computer. Even though I'm going to use my computer again later, I'm still going to shut it down. Okay, so I'm using these kind of transitions, and these transitions become my sort of breaks too. Okay, look forward to something pleasurable when you finish, whatever that is. Hanging out with your friends, playing a video game, cooking, eating something delicious. Going for a walk, playing basketball, whatever. Okay, have something to look forward to, but you do it when you've hit your deep work hours, okay, or 5:30 or whatever. Okay, and this last one I think is maybe unique to me, but I think it works quite well. Is I try to stick with one medium for as long as possible. So since I started doing deep work, I've gone back to working on paper, because I think that it unleashes my creativity and also allows me to be. I think I just work deeper when I write on paper. I'm just more focused. Whereas the computer, it's like there's so many kind of distractions on a computer where like I can get a notification, I can get this. Like I have to turn over my phone and turn off all your notifications, or do some sort of do not disturb thing during your deep work time. Okay, and let people know like this is deep work time. And they'll respect that because you're not going to be doing it all the time. You don't have that capability. If you do, I'm really impressed. Okay, but I try to stick with one medium for as long as possible. So even though I have to answer emails, right, I have to write papers, right, all this stuff is done digitally. I do as much work as I can on paper first. So that means you need to collect all your necessary materials ahead of time. So if I have notes, on deep work, it's already written out. It's already on paper. It's already over here, and I've already written it out, so that I don't need to switch media, okay, in order to get whatever it is I need to do. Okay, so you have to collect all your necessary materials ahead of time. That means you need to plan ahead of time. okay? So what I do is I don't turn on the computer until I have to, okay? And then even if the computer is on, I don't turn on my internet, I don't open an internet browser until I have to. And even if an internet browser is open, I don't check my email until I have to, okay? Until you must. So I create these kind of firewalls to the next portal, because each portal creates more distraction, or more possibilities for distraction. And while you may be the type where you can just say no to things, I find it takes energy to say no. So it's just easier for it not to be open, because it takes energy to open it, right? So I just don't open it. So if it's not on, then I don't get distracted by it, okay? So you just have firewalls to each portal. Now, if you find that every time you do this, or you're like, oh, I was only supposed to open the computer after I completed my first draft of the introduction, and then I was gonna type it up. Well then, if you must pretty often, that means you need to spend time planning, more time planning, okay? You need to plan ahead better, okay? You shouldn't be like, oh shit, sorry, I didn't mean to curse. Oh shoot, I forgot, that citation, or that's not here, it's not written out, right? Like everything that you need, even when you're on your computer, you shouldn't need to go to the internet to look something up. That should already be kind of in your kind of like on your Word document or in your notes or whatever, okay? That way other things can't come in and jump in, okay? Obviously don't waste time, like plan too much on one medium in order to avoid jumping to the next, okay? But stick with one medium for as long as possible. That's my finding, okay? Everyone's different, okay? And another thing too is like, I kind of use my different devices, and this is also a privilege, right? Like I use my work computer only for work. I try not to do any socializing on it. Or if I do, I make sure that everything has already been turned off and work time is over, okay? So I don't like watch movies and write papers on the same laptop, something like that. I don't have Facebook on my phone, for example. These kinds of things, right? Creating these kind of physical structured differences actually makes it easier for you to be less distracted and to focus and give attention to what you want to give attention to, as opposed to having your attention hijacked by something else. Okay? All right. So yeah. Now, these are all the benefits of deep work. I've already given them to you, and I've explained to you many strategies of how to do deep work. Now, what are the critiques of deep work? Okay, right? So we're academics, right? We're always going to make sure that if an idea is good, it can withstand critique, right? So the Marxist critique number one is deep work will generate more value for capitalists. Okay, well, I mean, yeah, if you work for, I don't know, Amazon, okay, and your job is to do, design algorithms that make, delivery faster, and you spend a lot of deep work doing that, then yes, you are generating more value for capitalists and stakeholders and that kind of thing. Well, you don't have to do that. You can do deep work on what you want. If your deep work is writing out, or doing research on why Amazon is bad for the world or something like that, if that's what you so choose, then that also needs deep work, and deep work will also make you better at that, okay? If you are a revolutionary, okay, or if you're not a revolutionary and you want to crush the revolution, whatever it is that you want to do, deep work will help you get there, okay? So yes, it can generate more value for capitalists, but it can also generate more value for you, okay? And definitely doing shallow work, right, by going on Facebook and just doing these things that won't advance your career and just kind of like, creates more of these weak connections that allows companies to grow, that also generates value for capitalists, okay? So deep work, especially if you're working on wildly important goals to you, okay, and doing things that generate sacred meaning for you will generate your value, okay? Marxist critique number two, deep work is a privilege of the historically white bourgeoisie. Yeah, and if you're watching this, you are part of that new, upper class that is able to be a knowledge worker, has the time to listen to a long video about deep work, okay? So, but like I said, if a plum, like Epictetus says, right, if a plum falls in your lap, use it. This is your privilege, okay? And maybe, just maybe, you can use that privilege to do more work in things that matter to you that can allow these privileges to others, right? For example, like maybe, I hope that someone who maybe did not have the ability or the time or the opportunity to do deep work can watch this and maybe be able to do deep work and gain freedom using their newfound discipline to get what it is that they really want. Okay. Yeah. And, it's weird too. It's like deep work, used to be, what we consider to be like what very, very poor, people to, like monks or stonecutters or something like that, So, yeah, I think deep work is a privilege. And if you're lucky enough to do it, you should do it, but you still get to decide what that work is for. Okay. Then there's the gender critique, craftsmanship. Yeah, definitely. All the terms that I've been using are written by men, pretty much, except for the, and all of the quotations I've given so far have been from men, probably white men. But the neurologist, Winifred Gallagher, is a woman, I guess. I don't know, but just this term, this language, right? Craftsmanship. Crafts, strangely enough, has often been the domain, many consider to be the domain of women, right? And the things that I consider to be deep work, like cooking, oftentimes are also considered to be very womanly, right? And many people think that, a lot of times, at least in schools, right, they think that writing and language stuff is for women or girls, right? And STEM is for men or something like that. So, I would say this is quite similar to the Marxist critique number 2. The response is the same. It's like, regardless of what it historically was, now you can do it, and women can do it, and women doing this will help women. I really believe that. And I think it's quite likely that most of my students who are watching this are probably women, just because, like the statistics about, university students, etc. But yes, just because, a lot of this was developed by men doesn't mean that you cannot use it and use it well. Okay. I encourage you to, especially because it will make you more valuable, and it's something that's rare in our economy and will give you more power. Okay. All right, so now to the power critique, right? Is this just part of the cult of productivity, right? Is this just, like more people trying to gain followers and that kind of thing? Well, yeah, I think Cal Newport is probably part of that, right? Like he probably wants you to join his network and read his blog and sign up for his workshops and that kind of thing. But you know what? You don't have to, okay? You don't have to join a cult to be productive. This is about you. This is about what you want to do, about empowering yourself, okay? And nobody owns deep work, okay? Yeah, that he coined this term, but people have been doing what he calls deep work for all of humanity, okay? That all of these kind of developments, whether that's coming up with tools or learning how to fire, or even childcare, and doing a really good job of childcare and teaching, okay? This is also what he calls deep work, okay? So I encourage you to do it. And, like, look, you don't have to pay money, okay? What, like this, I'm giving this to you, okay? Share it with whoever you want, okay? Let them have it. I know YouTube makes money, but whatever, right? Like, share it, learn it, master it, do it your own way. And don't surrender your kind of power to others. Cal Newport doesn't make you productive. You make you productive, okay? And that's if you want to be productive, and productive on the things that matter to you, okay? Okay, 2 more is straw man critique. Straw man is like, oh, that's just such an easy argument. It's so easy to critique, right? It's like, okay, so one would be like, distraction is obviously bad for productivity. Well, yeah, but do we know it's that bad? And if you knew that already, why did you watch this to the end, right? And lastly, I don't think we understood not only how bad distraction is for productivity, but we also don't know how meaningful and important deep work is to your sense of, kind of like satisfaction in life. So I don't think it's a straw man, because we don't have an understanding of the degree and the power and the influence of distraction and the influence and the power of concentration. Okay. So I don't think it's a straw man in that sense. And if it were so obvious, why is it that many people found that they had so much time during this Corona crisis, to do all this work, and yet did not get that work done? So that points out to me, at least, that there's something that's missing. That's some piece of knowledge they don't understand. Lastly, there's a critique that it's a Luddite, right? Ludditism is this belief in like, new technology is evil or bad, okay? And, when you call someone a Luddite, it's like a pejorative. It's like saying, oh, you're backwards or something, right? And you might think that this is some sort of technophobia, but I don't think so. Right. One, obviously, I'm sending this to you through, online social media sharing, video sharing websites. So I'm not a technophobe. And Cal Newport definitely is. Right? He's a computer science engineer, scholar. But at the same time, it's understanding technology. It's understanding how it works and making sure it works for you. You don't want the things that you utilize to end up utilizing you, which is what Facebook and a lot of social media does, right? It takes your interests and uses it and sells it to marketers. It takes your data and sells it. Like, Facebook makes money not from us. We are Facebook's product, okay? We are the product, and Facebook's customers are advertisers, okay? So it's not a technophobia, it's understanding, okay? Understanding how technology works and what it does, okay? And how to use it well. So going back to that law of the vital few, right? Using it well, using it with mindfulness, okay? All right, so now to the conclusion, okay? I know we're finally here, okay? Hopefully, you kind of, because this is digital, right? You can compress the time, you can change the time. So, if you fast forwarded to here, then hey, we're at the conclusion. If you paused and came back to this, that's cool too, right? Okay, so my conclusion is deep work is hard. Okay, deep work is hard, all right? And it's like, Obama says, right? He said before, hard things are hard, okay? Deep work is hard, okay? But that's also why it's valuable. That's also why it's rare. And that's also why it's meaningful, okay? So one thing is, it's not gonna get easier, okay? Like, I've been doing this only for, a month and a half, but I've also been trying to hone my concentration and my productivity and my efficiency for the last 10 years, okay? And I'll tell you, and I agree with this, is Greg LeMond says this, he's a cycling champion, okay? It never gets easier, but you just go faster, okay? It never gets easier, it's always hard. It's always hard to press the timer. It's always hard to get started. It's always hard to write that sentence. It never gets easier, but you go faster, okay? It goes faster, it goes faster, it goes faster, okay? So it's still gonna be tough. It's still gonna be hard. You might be like 60 years old and look back on a career and you're like, oh, I have to do deep work. And it's gonna be hard, okay? But you will go faster, okay? Secondly, this is a quotation from Norman Vincent Peale, but shoot for the moon, okay? Be ambitious, go for it, okay? Even if you miss, you'll land amongst the stars. And what that means is, if you really put your energy, your effort, and respect into the process, you may not get exactly what you want. You may not hit your wildly important goals, but whatever does happen will be great. So even if you don't get whatever it is that you wanted, if you put all that deep work into it, whatever ends up the result of that process is gonna be fantastic, okay? You'll learn so many things. You'll have so many more options. Your skill set will be so much greater. And most important, your mind will be able to go deep, fast, and for a long time. And whatever it is that you end up doing, you may not know what you want to do with your life right now. But if you get good at doing deep work and you commit to doing deep work, whatever it is that you end up doing is going to be awesome. Okay? All right. So that's the end. Okay, so, congratulations to you on completing Game of School. I know many of you are graduating, so, I'm happy for you. This is also my last lecture for HKU, so it's kind of a sad moment, but, maybe it's to be continued, right? So with that in mind, I ask you, what are your wildly important goals? I really recommend that you really think about this. Do you want to write? Do you want to create? Do you always want to write things? Do you always want to create videos or choreograph or dance or sing? What is it that you really want to do? Your wildly important goals. Okay? What creates a terrible longing inside of you? That's what you want to do. Okay, write those down. Is it graduate school? Is it a career? Is it social change? Okay, all of these things. Deep work is a way to get them. Is it physical and emotional health? And this is really important goals, okay? Financial health, language acquisition, or mastering difficult skills. Have you always wanted to be a jazz pianist? Is that your wildly important goal? Well, deep work is what will get you there, okay? You have the keys to the kingdom, but you need to decide what it is that you want to do. So if you want to share this with me, I'm happy to hear it, okay? Yeah, and so that's it. There's more videos here. You can click on these. There's also should be links in the YouTube video. But yeah, these are all the lectures I gave this semester. my last semester at HKU, so I'm putting them up on the web so that anyone can watch them, okay? And feel free to share this video. You earn this content by completing Game of School and earning the highest score, so you can share it with whomever you'd like, okay? And some more resources. So Cal Newport started off with the Study Hacks blog, so you can click on that. Those of you who are thinking about going to grad school, you can go to the Grad Cafe. It's a forum that talks about, and you work with other people about applying and staying in graduate school. Then if you do get into grad school, right, and that's what you want to do, there's a blog called The Thesis Whisperer. Okay, so that one is pretty good. It has a lot of really good advice for grad school life and how to do things. And then if you are in grad school and you're approaching the end and you want to get a job in academia, I highly recommend going to the Professor is In website. Professor Karen Kelsky also used to be I think she was like a dean or something, but she runs a book. She wrote a book and has an advice blog and also does professional consultations. I especially recommend this for women and women of color. Excuse me. Because there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of difficulty. So go in with your eyes wide open. And it doesn't hurt, even if you're just an undergrad right now, it doesn't hurt to go through and understand more about the profession, okay? And lastly, these are really good too, is the Tomorrow's Professor. Is regular postings from that a professor at Stanford has been sending out for like decades, okay? And it comes out pretty regularly. And these have, and he kind of does what I just did, right? But much more efficiently, much better. I guess he's spent a lot more time doing deep work on it because he's much better at it. But he takes ideas and reviews them and explains them and gives you excerpts, so that you're kind of up to date about, what's the latest in the field when it comes to education and teaching. Okay. All right, that's it. Okay, so I'll take this opportunity to say goodbye. Okay, thanks for spending your semester with me. I wish you the best of luck. I hope that you find meaning, and hang in there. Remember that whatever you get in life, it'll be what you give. So you're going to get what you give in life. Okay. All right. So good luck and take care. Bye.